Good morning and welcome to today's webinar, Active Shooter Armed Assailant Response Training for the DHS Run, Hide, Flight Protocol, presented by our sponsor, Heffernan. We're so happy that you can join us. My name is Michelle Wilcox and I will be your moderator today, and I will also be monitoring questions you may have during the session. Before we open up the session, let's review a couple of key items. All of the webinar materials we discuss can be found at the URL currently showing on your screen. I will be sharing this with you in a follow-up email, so don't feel like you need to write it down right now. If you have trouble with your internet connection during the webinar, we recommend leaving the presentation and logging back in. We do not control the audio, your devices do. So if you have audio difficulties, try adjusting the volume settings on your device. If the telephone line goes down during the call, hang up and call back again at the same number. If all lines go down, heaven forbid, watch the on-screen chat box for an alternative calling number. Feel free to ask questions or provide feedback by using the chat box or questions box during the webinar. If you're using a tablet, you may need to tap on the screen for the options bar to appear. Then you can select the appropriate option. We may not respond immediately, but we will try to work your questions and feedback into the presentation. If we cannot get to your comments or questions during the session, we will be online afterwards to respond, or we may follow up in an email if we run completely out of time. You may also email us at moderator@aspenrmg.com for up to 48 hours after the webinar. This will be a 1-hour presentation. Questions and comments are very much encouraged throughout, and the presenter will be answering questions at the end. Lastly, if we have a number of upcoming webinars covered a variety of topics, including those listed on the website you can see behind. In addition, we are offering mandatory preventing sexual harassment training on June 11th. With that, let's begin with today's webinar. Our presenter today is Steve Albrecht. Dr. Albrecht is a trainer, author, and consultant specializing in complex HR issues and security concerns. He holds a doctorate in business administration, an MA in security management, a BS in psychology, and a BA in English. He is board certified in HR, security management, employee coaching, and threat management. He has written 24 books on business, service, leadership, security, and criminal justice subjects. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Mr. Albrecht.
Thanks, Michelle, and good afternoon and good morning, everybody, from wherever you are. A lot of things to talk about, especially for you California folks. There are some changes in the legislators have made some changes that now require us to have a workplace violence prevention plan. I'll talk about that briefly. Let me get my slides up here and let's see if they come in. Michelle, how does that look? Good to go?
Yeah.
Great. So thanks to the good folks at Heffernan and also at Aspen Risk Management. I think this is probably close to 10 years that I've been doing these programs for them, for Phaedra and for Steve Thompson. And so I thank them for that and for Michelle for her work today. My claim to fame in workplace violence prevention is I wrote the first book in the country on this issue back in 1994, a book called Ticking Bombs. I wrote that book with a psychologist in San Diego who was the police psychologist, a guy named Michael Mantell. Mantell was Oprah's Dr. Phil before there was a Dr. Phil, and so he actually got our book on Oprah, which is helpful back in the day. And in 1994, when the book came out, the primary concern for workplace violence was the post office. That's where these things were happening. And we actually had the Postmaster General write the foreword for our book back in 94, a guy named Marvin Runyon. One of the centerpieces, one of the focal points of the book for me was the interview that I did in prison with a guy named Robert Mack. Robert Mack killed 2 people during his termination hearing at General Dynamics in San Diego in 1992. I interviewed him in prison in 1993 in California in San Luis Obispo, and the book came out in 94. So in terms of the work that I have done in similar books, I've written probably 3 other books on workplace violence of the 26 that I've written, and I have interviewed 2 other workplace violence perpetrators in prison, one of them right before the pandemic, a guy named Scott DeCry, who killed his ex-wife and 8 other people and 7 other people in her beauty salon in Seal Beach, California in 2011. So if I look at the work that I have done in workplace violence prevention, it is really focusing on how we look at this subject in terms of preventing the primary factor. And if you take nothing from our time together today, consider this as the primary security, safety, and HR issue connected to this issue, which is the perpetrator's desire for revenge. When I have interviewed these people in prison, when I've looked at the thousands of cases that have come through the news media, starting when I was beginning in the subject in 1992, all the way up till now. We had a stabbing at a Braintree, Massachusetts movie theater where 4 girls were stabbed by a guy that came in there, and he stabbed a couple other people at a McDonald's before he was taken into custody. We've had a shooting at a linen company in outside Chester, Pennsylvania, just last week, where a guy killed 2 people and wounded 3 others. He was a current employee. When I look at all these cases across the board, whether it's domestic violence involving an employee or a current employee or a former employee or someone we provide services to, like students or patients, we know that healthcare violence happens. We know that college and university and K through 12 violence happens. It's about this desire for revenge. So if you go back to what our therapist friends tell us, that hurt people, meaning that people have been hurt, have this desire to hurt other people. It goes back to our conversation here about workplace violence prevention as focusing a lot on the safety and security part, which we'll certainly talk about, but really focusing on how we treat people, whether it's coworkers, colleagues, whether you're a boss, whether you're in human resources function, security function, you're a supervisor of some type, how we treat our customers, vendors, visitors, how we treat people we provide services to, even high risk, high stress services. You know, we talk to people that are running pain management clinics for patients. We talk to people that are working in schools, K through 12 and college, university. It can be a very stressful environment. How we treat people in that environment is really critical. So we have 3 polling questions that we want to start with. So Michelle, let's jump on those and we'll talk about your answers.
Okay, the first one, my company/agency has a workplace violence prevention plan. Yes, no, or don't know. And just launched it. We're going to give it a couple seconds here. And those statistics, Steve, are just alarming. I mean, it's sad that we have to live in a place where you don't know what's going to happen at any time, let alone your office. Okay, so I'm going to let it go to about, we got 75% voted, so 48% say yes, 32 no, and 20 don't know.
Okay, number 2.
Number 2, let me close that. My company/agency has shown some version of the run, hide, flight video of employees as a part of the training program for a staff meeting. Yes, no, or don't know.
So have you seen any videos that are done by the City of Houston, Texas Department of Homeland Security or any other versions as a training video? Sometimes local PDs and sheriffs put them out. Sometimes they're done by local government, sometimes by the feds.
Okay, so a majority of people, 70% say no, 21 say yes, and 9 say they don't know.
Okay, third one.
Third one, does your company/agency have a threat assessment, emergency response, critical incident, or crisis program management team? Yes, no, or don't know. Give it a couple seconds here. Thank you for everybody for your participation. We really appreciate it. Okay, so it's kind of half and half. So we've got 42% say yes, 41% say no, and 16 say don't know.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for that, for running that, and also for those of you that gave the answers. So the Workplace Violence Prevention Plan is 2 issues. One is policy about evacuation, about weapons possession, about what we do in terms of discipline and termination, whether you're a public sector or private sector agency, what rules, guidelines you have to follow in terms of Skelly hearings if you're a public California agency, for example. And also the Workplace Violence Prevention Plan is who is in charge, and these are the people I would call the safety and security stakeholders for your organization. So it could be IT, facilities, human resources, security if you have that function, either public or private sector. It's liaison with law enforcement. Sometimes they come into the conversation as well. It's your general manager, your CEO, your CAO. If you're in government, it's city manager. It's also your legal person, which is city attorney, a county counsel in government, or your private sector law firm that provides legal services to you. All those people, and facilities as part of the access control discussion, and IT is part of the cyber protection discussion. All those people are part of the safety and security stakeholders for what we would call a threat assessment team, or in California, we're calling this the Workplace Violence Prevention Administrator or Administration Plan. We'll talk about that. Second part, there's lots of videos out there, some good, not so good. There's a video that's kind of the historic one, which is Run, Hide, Fight, done by the City of Houston, Texas, and the Department of Homeland Security. It's okay. I'll show you the screenshots for both of those. The one that I like better than that, which is actually done by the California Cal State University system, which I think is superior to the government's DHS video. The DHS video by the feds, the bad guy looks like Vin Diesel in one of the, Fast and Furious movies. I think there's some better versions out there. There's some I'd want to stay away from, which have kind of a triggering process for employees that don't want to see, blood and guts on the screen. So I would definitely stay away from those. And then the third one, it's good to see that you have a collection of those safety and security stakeholders together in some type of team, whether we call it threat assessment team or incident response team, business continuity team, whatever you call it, where these people are together to look at anything that threatens the safety and security of the organization, including cyber threats or bomb threats or issues related to current employees or former employees, domestic violence involving an employee. Oftentimes we come across these situations, especially domestic violence involving an employee, when the perpetrator is in the lobby. We come across these situations where the perpetrator is a customer, a vendor, a visitor, a student, someone who's angry at our organization when it's reached a boiling point. And oftentimes there are a lot of warning signs and risk factors that other employees saw, but perhaps didn't know who to talk to, didn't know who to report to, which we'll talk about. And the other part is they were afraid of retaliation, which we'll discuss as well. So you can see of my books, these are the focus I've had in the workplace violence books, the Ticking Bombs book with Mantell, the Fear and Violence book I wrote as a textbook for Duke University, that's still out there. I wrote a book for the American Management Association on crisis management, which also incorporated workplace violence as well. And then I did a book with my training partner, Bob May. Bob is in Northern California. He's a fire chief and a lawyer, which is a great combination for training. He and I did a book, which is a paperback on Amazon called Stay Safe at Work. A lot of things in there connected to what we're talking about here for workplace violence prevention. So for those of you that are in California, Senate Bill 553 is the workplace violence program plan. It requires these things that you see on the screen: a written operational plan and policies supported by what is called a quote, and this is OSHA driven, workplace violence prevention plan administrator. Now, this is typically someone who is in human resources function or senior management, senior leadership, or could be security if you have that function in your organization as well. Most of the work I do in my efforts in the last 30 years I've been doing this, probably I would say 70% is government and the other 30% is private sector. So a lot of the things that I do are connected to city and county government. I work for 2 large insurance agencies in California that are risk management pools. So workplace violence prevention plan administrator is someone who, working in connection with colleagues, is the one that operates the policies, makes the adjustments, and focuses on safety and security, and look at the other things that have to be done here per this 553 Senate bill. Again, this is driven by OSHA, and it takes place in California as in July 1st of 2024. Now, in talking to my colleagues, we're not going to see OSHA, a SWAT team come in with inspection pads and go through everything in your organization, but you need to have these things in place as soon as possible, including copies of policies that all employees have seen, that you have an illness and injury prevention plan, that you record and capture any potential workplace violence events, including verbal threats. Training to the employees can range from 1 to 2 hours, 90 minutes, could be online, could be face-to-face, by you bring in experts or you have people in-house that can do this. Sometimes your security function can train this material as well. That they're exposed to the concepts of how to report threats, how to recognize the safety and security stakeholders in their respective organization, and what our response is going to be. So if threats are reported to senior management, this threat assessment team or this collection of the administrators or the people that are security, HR, legal, management, leadership, IT, facilities, that type of people, that there is a response to the threat and that it is not just blown off or not just ignored. And that there's also discussion about how we respond to TROs, or temporary restraining orders, or civil orders. Those documents oftentimes come up where the victim employee has a restraining order against a domestic violence partner. And I spent 16 years with the police department in San Diego. I was a DV investigator. I handled 1,500 cases in my time span. Most domestic violence victims work. And sometimes we discover that one of our employees has a restraining order against her ex-boyfriend, Crazy Larry, when he's in the lobby. So one of the things we've seen in California, and it may be in your state, if you're not in California, you have to determine this. It's not in all states, which is sort of disturbing to me, is a protection for employees who bring domestic violence to the attention of their organization, meaning we have something called Senate Bill 400 in California, which says you cannot be fired for bringing the fact that you have a domestic violence situation to your employer. It is now a protected class in California, like age, race, gender, that type of thing, because we want to set up a process where employees feel comfortable and motivated and not fearful of bringing these things to the attention of their supervisors and managers, HR, security, those functions, leadership, if we can't fix what we don't know about. And the second piece of that Senate Bill 400 in California is we have to create a safety plan for that employee at work. So you need to look at what your legal services, the legal entity for your agency, your organization says about responding to temporary restraining orders. We don't broadcast it around the organization, but we give copies of people on the need to know basis. We do the best we can to protect the employee, who sometimes is tied up in the emotionality of the situation. We may need to call the police on their behalf to help enforce the order. The fourth point there, we want to demonstrate due diligence on all reported threats that come into the organization. That is part of the Senate Bill 553. Those of you in California, you may think that this has been driven by an event, and you would be correct. Some employee went into the light rail system in San Jose several years ago. I think he shot 6 or 7 people, and then himself. That situation led these legislators in Sacramento to create Senate Bill 553. Second to the last there, site security assessments for all hazards in your organization, not just workplace violence threats, but hazards in general, and that you make corrections when you see those. So my partner Bob May and I do a lot of these site security assessments where we just come in and say, let's look at everything in this organization, from access control to cameras to lights and alarms, all that stuff, and how we evacuate people and what our response is to threats. And we write a report which helps the organization make corrections. You can do that yourself in your organization if you have qualified people, especially from a security or HR background, that can look at the totality of the organization and make an assessment report that leads to changes and improvements. And then the last one is really the post-incident response. What the legislators are talking about, what OSHA is talking about, is a support of victims and consequences for perpetrators of workplace violence, including discipline and termination and arrest and prosecution by law enforcement and prosecutors. And also that we look at, and this is an important part to me, the mental health piece here as well. I talked to a lot of people who were at the Jason Aldean concert in Vegas, where about 7 or 8 years ago, where there was 50+ people killed. And all the people I talked to, I said, did you go to counseling, either on your own or through your employer? And they said, well, we used the employee assistance program, or I went to my own private therapist. And I'm like, great. And all the people that I talked to that did that were able to get back to some sort of normal life after that situation, even being exposed to a highly abnormal, dangerous situation. So I'm a big believer, and I've talked a lot in my career about the value of employee assistance program, about psychological services that organizations have, not waiting in a electronic Rolodex to figure out how to call this person after an event happens, but to get in contact with these clinicians to be able to bring them into the organization on a basis that is necessary after an event to help the coping response. And it's done in such a way that the employees know that it exists in the organization, that these therapists, these crisis management and clinical professionals can come in and support what's going on in the organization in terms of recovery. And that has to take place as a thought process rather than just wait till something happens. So that's Senate Bill 553 in kind of a nutshell. Speaking of OSHA, and if you look at OSHA categories for workplace violence, there are 4. This 5th one here is mine. I think cybercrime and denial of service and ransomware is going to be the 5th category. I do a lot of work with utilities, and we see some issues around power and electric and water and wastewater treatment programs. Their SCADA systems being attacked by these perpetrators, oftentimes from overseas. I think that's the 5th workplace violence category. Hasn't happened yet. That's my early guess. I'm trying to get ahead of the trend. I think these things are going to be connected to attacks on hospitals and the emergency medical record systems and things in healthcare that I'm concerned about. But these other categories 1 through 4, you look at these from your own perspective as an employee and as a manager, supervisor, leader for your organization, and say, where are we most likely? I work in an office tower in Springfield, Missouri. Crooks are not coming into this facility to rob me. I don't let them into my office, right? So criminals or strangers, quite unlikely. I don't have visitors, vendors. I don't see clients in my office, and so type 2 is quite rare. I don't have any employees, so type 3 is quite rare for me, and type 4 is not going to happen either. I don't have domestic violence situation in my life. But if you look at how you serve your clients or customers, are you in the exchange of money, which is type 1 is most common. Actually, workplace violence type 1 is the most common category. If you're serving this population type 2, there are some higher risk entities here. It's customers, it's students, and it's patients. Patients in healthcare, again, healthcare, a very high risk situation, especially emergency rooms, pain management clinics, things like that. Students, K through 12, college and university environment, we've seen workplace violence there for sure. Taxpayers, people are upset about fees, fines, collections, assessments, taxes, that type of thing. Again, the desire for revenge drives their behavior. Type 3, current or former employees, always a possibility. Type 4, this is that shadow issue where the employees come forward oftentimes fearful that they're going to be fired if they reveal they have a domestic violence situation. I would strongly encourage you to put into your written workplace violence policies. You need to have those first off, and you need to put in a phrase, a paragraph that says, if you are a victim of domestic violence and or you have a restraining order against someone, you need to tell us about it. We won't punish you for that information, but we need to protect you and the other employees. We can't fix what we don't know about. There's been lots of litigation early on in the workplace violence arena back in the 90s where people were killed at work and the surviving family sued, and the employer said we had no knowledge that a restraining order of this domestic violence issue existed. We want to create the type of environment where not prying into people's personal lives or not embarrassing them or embarrassing them about their situation, but knowing how to respond to these situations only can be proactive and effective if we know about it before the person comes into the lobby. So that's phone threats, it's email threats, it's the presence of restraining order. We need to know about this to help with category 4. And I think category 4 is a shadow issue because of this fear that employees have of being terminated, or in which case they have 2 problems, no job and same scary domestic violence situation. We want to make sure that doesn't happen, and we support them at work as best as we can. So our conversation here is keeping everybody safe, even with varying degrees of compliance from the people we serve. We may serve angry people, we may serve taxpayers, customers, people are not happy with us over some issue. It's money, it's services, they're not happy. We want to create a service culture, a safety culture, and a security culture all rolled into one. We serve our clients, customers, taxpayers, ratepayers, whoever it happens to be. We are a safe business. People feel emotionally safe working there. People feel physically safe working there. People feel like the organization responds to any safety concerns that they have, whether it's slip and fall hazards or all the way up to workplace violence. And we have a security culture where we ask employees to tell us about things that they see. Folks hanging around the facility that shouldn't be there, trespassers, issues with theft, things that are happening inside or outside the organization that the leadership may not know about that the employees can tell us about. We want to create a sense of employee trust about this issue, that we respond to these things when they come to our attention, that we have a threat management process. We look at threats and we decide, is this a security issue that we can handle inside? Do we need outside security help? Do we need outside consultants? Do we need help from human resources? Do we need help from law enforcement? Who is the entity that's going to provide services to us inside or outside our organization? And create a sense of public trust that this is a safe place to work and a safe place to visit if you have the type of entity where people are coming into your facility. We want to help employees deal with each other and deal with the people we serve, whether it's vendors, customers, taxpayers, ratepayers, with listening skills and patience and empathy. And we want to do this where we take care of each other. We don't allow bullying or harassment, because the driver, as I've said, and I will continue to say, for workplace violence is this desire for revenge. And the last one, The lifeguard model, which I'm very serious about, is you must take care of yourself before you can take care of anybody else. So when we talk about run, hide, fight, which is the active shooter model for run out of the building as quickly as possible, hide out inside the building in the safest room that you can lock and barricade, or fight back with whatever you have if that's not possible. Those other first two are not possible. The lifeguard model says you must take care of yourself before you can take care of others. So some must-dos: fair, ethical, empathic treatment of everybody: staff, co-workers, bosses, taxpayers, visitors, vendors, people we provide services to, clients. Second one, critical piece here, pre-attack leakage. I have been trained by the Secret Service and the US Marshals and the FBI. I started that training back in the 90s. I still go to conferences put on by these entities. I just sat through a Secret Service presentation a couple of weeks ago and an FBI program last week. When we look at pre-attack leakage, this is very important because the perpetrator does not usually threaten the target directly. They threaten other people through a third party. So the guy that wants to shoot his boss does not tell the boss because there'll be consequences, fired, arrested, whatever. He tells other employees. The kid that wants to shoot the football coach doesn't tell the football coach, right? He tells other kids on the football team. We need to have our employees at every level pay attention and know how to report this leakage, whether it comes verbally, whether through social media or some other electronic means. Number three, access control matters. Access control is important. There needs to be a staff side, and then there's the public side. Our customers should not be able to come into our warehouse. Customers should not be able to get into employees only areas. I'm a big believer in key cards and locks and doors and keeping people on the side of the building or the side of the counter they need to be on. Number four, try to do this for me as a favor to your pal Steve. Organize, schedule an annual run, hide drill. Not the fight part. No, we don't know any fake blood or SWAT teams or sirens or anything like that. Just schedule an annual drill like we do for a fire drill in California or an earthquake drill in California or a tornado drill where I am in Missouri or a hurricane drill in Florida, where we practice the run out of the building part for 15 minutes or hide out inside the building for 15 minutes. If we do that, we're trying to imprint on people what they want to do in an emergency situation. And the last one, really critical, establish your post-traumatic counseling expertise services. Now, find people in your community. There could be a psychological association, American Psychological Association chapter in your community. You may have critical resources that are behavioral health experts that are trauma trained, that you want to have a relationship with them that says this is how you come and work with our organization. Maybe we have a contract in place that we just sign if we ever have to, that type of thing. So a couple things that we know work when it comes to workplace violence prevention. Access control, as I said, is really, really important. You need to provide your key cards to the responding sheriff's office or the responding PD. We don't want to have our first responders, cops, PD, sheriffs, EMTs, firefighters locked out of our building. So as staff is evacuating, and this is something they may want to practice in a drill, we give them their key cards on the way out. Second one, tourniquets, tourniquets, tourniquets. There's a program that you see there called Stop the Bleed. It's also connected to something called bleedingcontrol.org. It's the same entity. Stopthebleed.com or bleedingcontrol.org is a group that was created nationally after the Sandy Hook elementary school shootings in Sandy Hook, Connecticut, where trauma surgeons and medical experts got together and said, we need to have tourniquets in these mass shooting events, these mass attack events. And if you look at most first aid kits that I see when I do site security assessments, I don't see tourniquets at all. I have about 6. I have one in my gear bag and one in my gym bag, and I have one in my car, and I have enough for my family. They're cheap, they're $10. So when I look at AED machines and I look at first aid kits, I'd like to see more tourniquets. And look at the Stop the Bleed training, which the healthcare providers in your city or county can come and do this for you for free. It's usually done by the nursing staff. It runs about 90 minutes. It's not scary, it's empowering. It tells staff how to work tourniquets and use them. Third one, we talked about the value or the importance of this leakage, these perpetrators. I'll talk about this third-party leakage a little bit more, which is that these perpetrators don't threaten the target directly, usually, unless there's an exception. It's called the intimacy effect, which is domestic violence. Every woman on the planet knows if this person says, if I can't have you, nobody else can, she knows how to fill in that statement, and it's dangerous. Those people are dangerous. But for the most part, what we're looking at is not someone who makes what we would call howler threats. I'm going to kill you, you'll be sorry, I'm going to get you. But the person who says nothing to the target but tells a third party what he or she is going to do. Now, here's the problem with that. Sometimes we don't discover these things because employees discount them or are afraid to report them or afraid of retaliation until after the fact. Or we see some of these social media third-party leakage things after the event has happened. But it's really important to pay attention to this leakage because it is not, and this is what the Secret Service has trained me so many years ago, it is not so much the direct threat to the target, unless it's domestic violence. It is the indirect third-party threat that comes through this leakage that we should be concerned about. And the last one, this rapport building and kindness and empathy and patience and listening skills with our taxpayers, customers, ratepayers, visitors, vendors, people that come into our orbit, people that we are disciplining or termination, that we have termination for, that we are empathic during that process, and that we are not creating a situation where this revenge piece is so likely. And that's a really big, important piece in terms of the HR part, which is about not allowing harassment and bullying in organizations. So here's what we know. These are mostly lone wolf male attackers. It's not a group of terrorists that do these things. It's one person, male or female, that does these. When we talk about the run, hide, fight, cover stops bullets. That's brick walls and concrete and steel. Concealment hides you. That's curtains. It's blinds. It's tinted windows and glass. We need to block out and protect ourselves in these safe rooms. We don't designate one. We just say, what's the safest place to be? We can cram as many people in: break room, restroom, conference room, supervisor's office, training room, and barricade the doors and keep this person out. Why? Because when we know when these perpetrators cannot get in the room, they move on, because they have, and this is the national average, 8 to 10 minutes until the attack is over when the responding police. I've trained thousands of cops in this model. I'm going to be in Kansas City in a couple weeks doing the same thing for them. And when they respond, they actively engage with the perpetrator. And so these perpetrators know they only have about 8 to 10 minutes. Third one's really critical. Don't speak to the media unless you're the designated person, unless you're the PIO or the corporate communications person, because when the employees speak out, they say stuff like, I knew this was going to happen, and management doesn't protect us. All that does is create bad feelings and lawsuits, and it's not great. We want the people to speak for the organization who are trained to do so and have the message for the media, which is accurate, because oftentimes people in the stress of the moment don't have good information. Last one, these are career-ending, life-harming, mentally dangerous events. People being injured or killed at work. We need to get good clinical support now. So find out who that is in your community and engage with them. So we look at these people not based on profiles. That doesn't work. And I've been working in this area for 30 years, and we're off of profiles. We're into behaviors. So no shocks here to you. This seems like what we would perceive to be, for these perpetrators, what their typical traits are. This is kind of an archetype, right? Early exposure to violence, early exposure to physical abuse, sexual abuse, and bullying, in which case they do that to other people as they grow older, grow up. Mental health history, they're both troubled, something's bothering them, and troubling, they bother people. You can be both. Most of the mental health history is depression. There's a narcissistic entitlement there sometimes. And this desire for revenge, again, the asterisk here, that can we stop this desire for revenge by how we treat them? Fair, empathic, humane treatment as an employee, as an ex-employee, as a customer, as a student, as a patient, passenger, whoever it is in our orbit. No remorse that they survive. They engage in targeted violence, which they oftentimes go after a boss or coworkers who have bullied them. Domestic violence certainly is targeted. The perpetrator goes after his or her former love interest and his or her new boyfriend sometimes, right? Narcissistically entitled means that they believe that they're doing the right thing, even though it's horrific. They're suicidally depressed and homicidally depressed, which is called the broken bridge of self-esteem. And this is what makes them dangerous. Being suicidally depressed and homicidally depressed means that you don't care about your own life and you don't care about the lives of others. That's what makes them dangerous. You and I have empathy for each other. You and I have empathy for ourselves. These people do not. And the last one's really hard, which is the desire to be infamous. Lady Gaga is famous. They want to be infamous, which is famous for all the wrong reasons. And they do these things because they know once they engage in some horrific act, they will be around the planet within 10 minutes after CNN and Fox and MSNBC discover who they are. There was a lot of conversation in the media about not publicizing these people by name and face. Hasn't happened yet. A lot of conversation addressed at the media to say, don't give these people any attention in terms of their writings and their postings on social media and their picture and their videos. Don't do that, but they do it anyway because they want eyeballs. And so I've looked at this for 30 years and hoped for that. It's not happened yet. So when you look at this person's desire to be infamous, Think about the Columbine perpetrators from '99. There are people still talking about what they did and admiring that work, even now as we look, 25 years later, which is sad. I belong to a group called the Association of Threat Assessment Professionals, ATAP, the Association of Threat Assessment Professionals. We were founded around 93, 94, 95, right around there. I've been involved in that group for 30 years. We focus on domestic violence, workplace violence, stalking. We focus on terrorism, and we also focus on safety and security in our schools, hospitals, and workplaces. Excuse me. So if you look at the path that we have created in ATAP, this is Ted Calhoun and Steve Michaels' model here. It is the pathway to intended or actual violence. Look how this pathway follows some of the events that we have seen in our world in the last 6 months even, right? Grievance, violent ideation, research and planning, pre-attack preparation, probing and breaches, and then the attack. So there is a decision point that these perpetrators make at the violent ideation stage. Everybody has a momentary fleeting violent ideation. Somebody cuts you off on the freeway and then you go back to drinking your coffee and life goes on, right? These people do not. They move past these this ideation into the decision-making process. And then you can look on the right-hand side and say, what de-escalates them or makes it less likely? Well, physical security, access control, alarms, cameras, gates, locks, security, vigilance by employees, vigilance by supervisors. What de-escalates them is empathic treatment. What de-escalates them is early threat assessment, looking at the things that they say or do and assessing the dangerousness of those events. What escalates them is bullying and harassment and poor treatment and this desire for revenge. What escalates them is no security devices or security devices aren't used. You can see this process is an overlay. Steve Weston and Ted Calhoun's model here is an overlay of the typical events that these people follow in terms of these attacks. So my clinical colleagues, I have a degree in psychology, but I'm not a psychologist. My clinical colleagues talk about this broken bridge of self-esteem, which is no regard for self for others and no empathy for self for others, meaning I can harm other people and not feel bad about it. I can harm myself and not feel bad about it. I don't care. Look at this phrase. It's disturbing, right? I want to outdo my idols, and they do idolize these people. I want international attention, and we give it to them. I want to be infamous, and we make them infamous, especially each year after the anniversary of the typical event that took place, whether it's at a movie theater or a bar or a church or a mosque or a synagogue or a concert or a workplace or a public place. We have a ceremony which reminds this person, even when they're dead or in prison, what they did. You can only kill me once, my actions will live on. That's what they believe. And so it's all these D's, right? Disconnected from society, disaffected, not connected to other people, and disaffected about it. They're angry that they don't have friendships and love relationships, depressed, driven to act, desire for revenge, desperate and dangerous. And so we have manufactured a lot of these people in this country and other countries as well. And I thought we'd be over this idea of workplace violence in my career. I'd be talking about something else, but it's not happened. So we look at threats, and we look in the kind of umbrella I want you to think about here is this concept of the hunter versus howler. This is the Steve Weston, Ted Calhoun model, those guys that created the ATAP overlay I just talked about. What they talk about in hunters versus howlers is lots of people howl. I'm going to get you. You'll be sorry. You better watch out. I put a bomb in this business. I'm going to shoot you outside. Those are howler threats, right? What they mean by that is howlers' function is to terrify people, to be provocative, to disrupt the business, to scare people. It is not their intention to do harm unless there's domestic violence involved, in which case there is. Hunters, by contrast, don't threaten the target directly. They threaten through a third party. Why? Because if you think about a real hunter, they don't want to scare off the prey, right? Howlers howl to draw negative attention, to be provocative and frighten people and shut down the business. Every time we close a school or we shut down a library or some other thing, that's howler. Howler threats have worked, as opposed to hunters who work in stealth. Think about this. The Secret Service has done substantial research, and they have something called NTAC, or the National Threat Assessment Center, where it looks at this stuff for decades. They've done substantial research that said the most concern they have in terms of protecting the president, the vice president, is not the person that writes the angry letter or the angry email or the note in crayon that he's going to come shoot up the White House. Those are howlers. The people they fear are the ones who cut their hair and put on a Secret Service trench coat and get shiny sunglasses and buy the same type of semi-auto that Secret Service agents carry and put a wire in their sleeve and try to act like an agent to get close to where the president happens to be. That's hunter behavior, meaning they have a plan and they work in stealth. Those of you that are old enough to remember, John Hinckley shot President Reagan. Before he did that, he called Jodie Foster 3 times, the actress Jodie Foster, 3 times at Yale to say this is what he's going to do. He made no contact at all with the White House or Reagan, no letters, no phone calls, nothing. He told Jodie Foster what he's going to do. Would I bet my whole life on hunters don't howl and howlers don't hunt? No, but it's a model I've been used my entire career, and I think it makes sense if you look at the situations you face. The more concerns we have is not the person who says, I'm going to shut down your business, I'll see you in court, pal. That's a concern. We put a fence around that person, we act accordingly in terms of what they're saying they're going to do. We enforce consequences, including penal code threats. In most states have a penal code threat about verbal threats, but the ones that we really are concerned about is the guy who says, okay, this isn't over yet, but he doesn't say it out loud. And the one who leaks information, that's the key, to another person. They tell somebody else what they're going to do. Now, why do they do that? Why do they leak information? Because they can't help it, because they have a significant mental illness, and sometimes they want to be stopped or talked out of it, and sometimes they talk to people who they think support their plan. There's lots of reasons why they do that. So I spend my entire career dealing with howlers, which is the good news. I'm concerned significantly about the people that I don't always know are hunters until they get farther down that path from ideas to actions. The good news is, if there is good news here, most of the people we deal with, especially in public government or customers, that kind of thing, howlers. The bad news is sometimes we don't find out about the hunters until they're pretty far down the road. This is where we go along to the idea where employees have a significant need to tell us if they hear this leakage. So I told you about, we don't focus on profiles, we focus on behaviors, and this is typically the things that we see for these perpetrators. They're troubled, something's bothering them, they're troubling. They're angry, they're depressed, which is anger turned inward is depression. Religious zealotry, irrational religious beliefs, connection to terror groups. The injustice collector is probably the biggest one up there for me. They're hypersensitive to being slighted, they have a brittle personality, they're angry people in general, there's a paranoia built into that, and sometimes whatever we do, they predicted. I bet you're going to try to fire me, and we do. I bet you're going to call the cops, and we do, right? It just reinforces that paranoia. Substance abuse is not the drugs that you think. It's not typically alcohol or stimulant drugs. Oftentimes it is Adderall and Xanax and things like that, SSRIs and antidepressant and anti-anxiety medications that these people are abusing. They stop taking them, they become irrational as they detox from those medications. They've been bullied. They have significant off-the-job or significant life issues with no support, they believe. Marital, financial, legal, family problems, abuse, that type of thing. Now, acquired a practice with a firearm is not a risk factor for me if it's normal behavior. People buy guns and shoot on the weekends and whatnot all the time. It's when this person says, you'll find out why I bought this gun, which is a significant concern. The other factor besides the injustice collector and is being number one for me is the talks of using violence or workplace or school violence cases that have happened as if it were a good thing. Yeah, the guy that shot up that stadium, that was a pretty impressive firepower. That guy frightens me. That's not a normal empathic human response. Those people concern me because that's not normal behavior. We see third-party threats, this leakage, they're on the path from ideas to actions, and we see this hunter versus howler behavior. So again, these are archetypes, not profiles or labels, but behaviors that a reasonable supervisor, a reasonable employee would see and we want to know about. So threat assessment team, look at the people involved here we talked about. It's legal, it's IT, because they have the knowledge of not only the cameras and the access control and the alarm systems and things, it's facilities. They have all the physical keys. They can operate the building. Risk management, safety, law enforcement or security if they have that function. Employee assistance program, behavioral health. On the right-hand side, PIOs, managers, consultants, things like that. Now notice the legal counsel keeps the case notes in any threat assessment team discussion with an employee because they can activate attorney work product privilege and keep that from being subject to subpoena or public records request. So threat assessment is where we look at the threat that faces our organization. Current employee, ex-employee, domestic violence involving an employee, a customer, student, stranger, robbery, that type of thing. And then we look at threat management is what we do. Okay, what is our plan? And if we look at California, this new Senate Bill 553, we have to have a plan in place and a response and a record keeping of all threats that come into the organization and what was our response. What did we do? Who do we contact? Law enforcement, HR, security, what do we do as our functions? Okay, couple things. I'm a big believer in security incident reports. They drive change in organizations, and here's why. Oftentimes my clients will say, Steve, we need a restraining order against this ex-employee or this customer or whoever it happens to be, and I'll say, tell me about him. And they'll say, he's horrible and threatens people. And I say, how long has this been going on? They go, 2 years. And I say, let me see the file. And they say, we don't have a file. It's all anecdotal. And I say, it's going to be really hard for us to get a restraining order against a person where we have no documentation. So we don't have to write down everything, but if it's a security incident related event, the police come, the sheriffs come, the fire department comes, it's a slip and fall, it's a threat thing, it's something that we capture as a business continuity issue to our organization, we want to write that down on a security incident report so we can document. And if we have to go to our boards, or we have to go to our budget people, we have to go to our attorneys, we have to go to folks that can pay for improvements in our security posture, the security incident report helps drive that. And it demonstrates, especially from OSHA's perspective, this new desire for due diligence they want to see from organizations, the Senate Bill 553. So here's some beliefs that people have about active shooters. They think they're invincible because they're armed and they have flak vests and tactical weapons. They're not. They're just goofballs that got this stuff and are attacking the organization. They're not Navy SEALs gone bad. Most people don't understand they have about 5 to 10 minutes to get away and get to safety or to shelter in place, to run, hide, fight, right? These perpetrators know that the cops are coming within about 10 minutes as a national average. Most people think that the police are going to be able to recognize the perpetrator because they'll be holding a gun. That may not be possible. The cops may not know who it is. You have to identify this person by description, clothing, very, very accurately. Sometimes these perpetrators try to get away. Most people don't realize these people have a target list, and they do. Most people, and this is a personal choice, I would never do, it's up to you, think that if you lay on the floor and try to play dead, that the person will walk past you. I would never do that. I will fight back no matter what. Personal choice for you, but I don't think that's an effective strategy. 6, most people don't think that the shooter will fire through wooden doors or tinted glass. They will. That's why we don't hide behind doorways, the fatal funnel. We don't hide behind concealment, which is glass, curtains, blinds, right? Many people think that the cops are going to provide first aid as they clear the building. They will not, unless it's another cop who is shot. They're mostly trying to clear the building to find one or more attackers. I think they spend too much time looking for multiple suspects, but that's a different conversation. So we need to focus on tourniquets and being able to move, carry, drag, put onto a rolling chair as many people as we can get out to a safe zone to give them, get them to the first aid responders. 8, many people still think that gunshots are the sound of cars backfiring, which is pretty rare, or firecrackers. And you shouldn't be hearing firecrackers in February, right? And so we rationalize sometimes those irrational sounds. 9, very critical. The cops are going to show up at an actual active shooter in droves, and they're going to be wearing all kinds of gear, plain clothes, camo stuff, tactical stuff, SWAT officers, you know, cops in green uniforms from Border Patrol and blue uniforms from PD and green pants and tan shirts from the Sheriff's Department. You need to recognize and help other coworkers recognize that the cops are going to look like a variety of different things as they come up. Think about that shooting that happened with the husband and wife terrorist team in San Bernardino. They killed the people during the holiday party. 300 cops showed up at that event, 300, right? That's a mutual aid event, and you'll see cops coming from the railroad cops and junior college, everywhere, right? Number 10, most people don't understand the value of post-traumatic stress debriefing after the incident is over. I've talked about this. And last one, make sure we give our key cards to the first responders as we exit so they can get into the building and not get trapped in our hallways. So this is not a negotiation. These are not Navy SEALs. We have a very short window of time. This is a killing event, unfortunately, and the cops are going to show up in droves, and staff's got to be ready for that. We're going to ask people to provide basic first aid if they can, especially using tourniquets. That's what saves people from bleeding in these situations. And second to the last one there, be ready to give the 911 dispatchers as much information as they can to the arriving cops. They have an earpiece in as they drive up. They can hear it as they're climbing out of the car, what's going on. So 2 things here. One is the 911, run, hide, fight, active shooter video that's done by the City of Houston, Texas, Department of Homeland Security. It's okay. I mean, I've played it 683 times. It's all right. It's not my favorite. Bad guy looks like Vin Diesel, as you can see there, bald, shotgun. You can skip the first 90 seconds to get to the rest of the video that demonstrates the other scenes that you see here, run, hide, fight. It's okay. If that's the only one that you watch, that's fine. As a staff, I would suggest, can you look at these videos maybe once a year? The one I prefer, the one I like better, that I think is best, is Cal State University, Run, Hide, Fight. Put in Cal State University, Run, Hide, Fight into YouTube. It shows up. It's about 8 minutes and 20 seconds. I think it's It's more empowering. It's designed for students, but everybody gets it. I think you could show it at home for your kids, 14 and 15 years old and above. I think it's more reasonable than the Department of Homeland Security one, even though it says the same things. So I like it a lot. I think it's a valuable addition to our knowledge. If it was up to me, I would sit down as a staff once a year and watch the video and go, okay, got it, back to work. And you can see the things that we talk about. Run out of the building, hide out inside the building in the safest place that you can, barricade the doors, use your belt to double lock the, or to tie up the double doors, the handles, put stuff in front of the doors to keep the bad guy out. Fight back with whatever you have, fire extinguishers, sharp objects, heavy objects. This person is not expecting a fight. They're expecting you to give up because they have a gun. That's not the way the world works. We can fight back. Cover stops bullets, concealment hides you. In a perfect world, you would do a drill for me to make me happy, right? Once a year for 15 minutes to demonstrate the run part and the hide part. So you can see left side of the picture there, the screen slide, not so great. On the right side for safe rooms, left side really good. There's a phone line, hard line in there, which is a better way to get a hold of the dispatcher. It's lockable. There's no windows. There's self-defense items and first aid kit in there. Right-hand side, unlockable, too much glass on the main traffic pattern, not great. The best you might be able to do is just get in there and stay away from the doorway and fight back if the guy comes inside. Maybe he walks by, maybe he doesn't. But you don't designate safe rooms. We ask staff to discover their own. Could be break room, restroom, conference room, supervisor office, training room, someplace we store the mops or the file folders. We ask employees to go. We don't designate them because the bad guy could be a current or former employee. Go to the safest place you can barricade if you cannot get out of the building fast first. That's your first choice. So I talk about condition yellow, which is when around strangers, pay attention. When you're around people you don't recognize, pay attention. You're around people that are not supposed to be in your building, pay attention. As you walk to and from work, pay attention as you leave and enter the building. Slow down your breathing in high stress, high risk, high fear situations, because people can get tunnel vision. They black out, they don't think right, they can't remember their address for the building, they can't remember their own name. It's very stressful sometimes. We have to slow down our breathing and think about how to be able to function, to get away and to provide information to the first responders. When I talk to people that are in conflict with me, I try to stay out of this face-to-face. This is how boxers box and gunfighters gunfight, and how he got in my face, she got in my space. I tend to say in a more of an offset, sort of a bladed stance with people. I give them space to wave their arms around. I try not to get too close to them. I'm big on the idea of not violating people's space. And sometimes if it's useful, that I find that walking and talking with people that are angry is the most effective way, because we're side by side. We're not in this confrontational posture. Let's head over here. Let me take you over to the door, and let me walk you to another person here. Let me turn you over to my colleague. We talk about proxemic barriers in the workplace: counters, desks, furniture, things we can either put between us and an angry person or hide behind. Proxemics has to do with space, how close you allow people to get. And this last one here is Secret Service hands. You can see the guy on the right here protecting Obama. He's got his hands in a sort of prayer position. It's a protective posture I do when I'm talking with people that make me uncomfortable. I'm worried about my safety. I can push away, I can block and protect myself, but it looks sort of low key. It's not a fighting stance. I say, I hear what you're saying, right? But from this position, I can protect myself, and it looks kind of low key. It's called Secret Service hands. Last thing here. Stop operating under the myth of no past problems. This is what security guy to the stars, Gavin DeBecker, he protects Bobby Kennedy and Oprah and Jeff Bezos. DeBecker talks about the myth no past problems, which is nothing exciting or bad's ever happened here, therefore it's not going to. I'm not asking you to predict the future. I'm just saying, how do you use the idea that we don't use the past as a perfect predictor of the future? And the second piece up there is pay attention to the 4 spaces that are in your building. Public space, lobby, right? People can come in there and come and go. Semi-public space, we invite them into. It's a training room, it's a conference room, it's an auditorium, it's a place we do hearings, right? Semi-private room, semi-private area, just employees only. You need a key card to get in, you need to be an employee to get in. Vendors aren't allowed, taxpayers, customers not allowed. Private space, your desk, your workstation, your area where other people aren't gonna mess with your phone, your backpack, your purse, your wallet. We need to do a better job of protecting our semi-public and semi-private spaces, because sometimes that's how people get into our organizations. Last thing to think about, evacuations. How do we get out of our building? Code words. Call Dr. Green, which means go call the sheriff. Call Arnold, as in Schwarzenegger, right? Means go call the cops. PA or public address announcements that go through your building. If you have a multi-floors, what are they going to say? There's an unusual incident in the lobby and, on second floor, stay away. That tells other people not to go there. Location of your AEDs and first aid kits that have tourniquets, right? Earthquake kits, first aid kits, fire extinguishers, there are tourniquets around those things and you know how to use them. And then think about how we dial 911. For most phone systems, if you dial 911 with your cell phone, you're going to get the state police or the state patrol, highway patrol in California. If you dial 911 on a landline, it's going to go to the nearest dispatch center, which is typically PD, sheriff, fire, all in one building. So if you have a choice between 911 on your cell phone versus 911 on your landline, and you have the time and it's safer, use the landline. It's going to go to the faster entity, the faster agency. Use 911, it goes to the state patrol, state highway patrol. They have to transfer you to the local PD or local fire department. Last couple things here as we wrap up. These events are rare but catastrophic. We need to pay attention to the possibility, but not become obsessed over it. It's 30 years this stuff's been going on in my world. I'm hoping it'll stop at some day in my life. These are lone wolf perpetrators. They may use guns, edged weapons, or vehicles. No shooters ever shot through a door and killed employees or shot through to get into a door, pretended to be the police. Doesn't say it won't happen, but it's not happened before. They've shot through glass, but not shot through a secure door to kill anyone. We can't predict violence, but we can listen to pre-attack behaviors, this hunter behavior, which is connected to third-party threats and to leakage. We pay attention to howlers. We put a fence around them. We enforce consequences, but we really listen to what this possibility of hunters is all about, which is they have a plan and they're moving on from ideas to actions and they leak to other people what they're going to do. Okay. So our greatest strengths: employee management vigilance, rapid but measured responses, partnerships with our safety and security stakeholders, including outside law enforcement, but people inside your business, security, HR, senior management, PIO's office, things like that. And then training plans and drills. And if you're in California, in listening to me in California about this, go look and see what your requirements are for Senate Bill 553. And do you need a workplace violence program administrator that enforces new policy, that trains our employees, that does collects the list of threats, and also has a site security assessment as part of their plan. Michelle, back over to you. Happy to take any questions. Thanks everybody for your time and attention, and thanks for listening to the poll questions. And thanks.
That was a lot of great information and stuff that was new to me. So thank you so much. We did have one question that somebody asked. They have a lot of gang activity in their area and concern for robbery or threats at the workplace. So how should they handle that?
Yeah, the problem with gang behavior is that these guys are retaliatory, and they have long memories for people that call the cops on them, and so it's a significant issue. A couple things. One is awareness building. The other is, do we pay attention to how our employees get to our facilities, get inside the facility? Do we need security that needs to be outside in the parking lots? And then also to look at events that have happened, do we capture those in security incident reports and say, what are the trends that we're seeing? Most larger PDs and sheriffs have gang investigators or even a gang unit. You may call them and say, hey, here's what's going on. What concerns do we have? And they oftentimes have officers or deputies that know specifically who these people are, and they can help enforce consequences. But it's a concern because the stuff leaks over from the streets into the suites, so to speak.
Okay, so a lot of questions are coming in right now. And if we can't get to them because we're almost running out of time, we will send emails directly to you folks. Somebody asked, what type of tourniquet do you recommend for general business locations?
Yeah, I've seen the ones that are on Amazon that are about $10, and they're, they have a windlass that you can tighten down and that you tighten it off with a little stick that holds it in place. And when the person says, ouch, the tourniquet is tight enough. It doesn't have to be super, SWAT paramedic thing, just the ones that you see, that the medical providers provide on Amazon is useful. And Michelle, I can stay late for people that want to answer questions or ask questions.
Okay, so we just have a few more. What is the best way to protect yourself in an outdoor event?
Yeah, that really requires a plan. And I do this a lot with my libraries. I do a lot of library security work, and they'll bring in some author who's controversial. They'll bring in some subject. They don't have a plan. And so it'll be something that's outside. They don't have, security or even enough barricades, anything like that. So anything that you're doing that involves the public or clients or customers, you got to have a security plan where you look at how do we get people in and out, and what do we need to focus on while they are there? Is it happening at nighttime? Are there weather concerns? You got to have a written plan, which needs to be debriefed pretty early before the event happens.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's where we're at right now. So somebody's asking, are you aware of any resources for teaching this material to persons with developmental disabilities such as Down syndrome or autism?
I think I've done this a lot for people on autism spectrum. There are caregivers. I've done a lot for group homes. I've done it for board and care facilities and like the Lanterman Center in California, which provides for people with disabilities. So there has to be some folks that are in charge of protecting that vulnerable population. Again, there needs to be policy and training and approach to that, which how do we protect that vulnerable population, especially evacuation? How do we get them to a safe place?
Right. Thank you. What is an employer's requirement for having employee emergency notification solutions, such as a push notification software, sorry, for SB 553?
Yeah, I mean, OSHA's going to say, how do we notify employees in mass ways? You know, is it an Eventbrite? Is it some kind of paging system that goes to their phones, or is it some kind of desk software that goes to their desks? How do we do that? And that's going to be a critical piece. I mean, notification of all employees, whether in the field, they're in the warehouse, they're in the building, is going to have to be something that's going to be driven by the technology. So you need to look to those vendors and say, what are you doing to help us comply with 553 for that?
Absolutely. Lastly, how do you help protect your 79-year-old boss who can barely walk and has medical issues?
Yeah, and then you say, what's the fastest way to get this person, male or female, get them out of the building? Is it put them into a rolling chair? Is it, you know, they can be carried because they're lighter? Is it there's an emergency exit that we need to consider? That's, for example, we cut a door in their office. I go to lots of buildings where people say, this is a beautiful historic building, but I say, well, where's the back door? And there isn't one. So you say, you know, we need to cut a door for this person to be able to get to the parking lot. That may be a concern as well. But yeah, that's definitely, and sometimes they're in denial as to whether or not they have mobility issues when they actually do. So it's a challenge.
Next question, we would like to add this to our ADP Learn portal for employees to review so we can track this webinar as training. Are we allowed to upload this to ADP portal?
It's up to you, Michelle. I mean, it's your client
that's
stuff.
Heffernan, yeah.
Whatever you guys do.
I'll check with Heffernan. And then lastly, you mentioned a training video for California employees, and they wondered what that website the video was on.
Yeah, if you go to California State University, you know, CSU, California State University, Run, Hide, Fight, you'll see the video on YouTube. It's about 8 minutes long.
Awesome.
It's not proprietary to them. It's public to them, so anybody can get access to it.
Awesome. This was really, I mean, I got so much information off this. And so I really appreciate everybody for attending today's webinar presented by Heffernan. We will send information by email with instructions on how to access a copy of the presentation as well as a recording. And if there's any questions we didn't get to, because they're still coming in, everybody really loved it, we will address those one-on-one, but I think we got pretty much everybody. Thank you, Dr. Albright, for your time and expertise today. We hope everybody found today's webinar to be a valuable use of your time. Be sure to join us on June 4th for our Stress Management, Real Tools for Work and Life Balance webinar. Thank you all and have a great day.
Thanks.